Hello, and welcome to the Red Bank Humanists podcast. Each month, Red Bank Humanists hosts a public forum featuring speakers and topics covering a wide range of subjects of special interest to the humanist community. To learn more, including information about our monthly book club and our Drinking Post-Theologically events, visit redbankhumanists.org and follow us on Twitter at Red Bank Humanists.
Today's speaker, David Niose, was the president of our national humanist organization, the American Humanist Association, for many years. He recently stepped aside from that position, but still is a board member on the association's board of directors. His background includes experience in law and mass communication. Having practiced law in Massachusetts since 1990, he has also worked in print and broadcast media, taught both history and law, and has written extensively on a wide array of issues. Upon joining the AHA board in 2005, he initiated and helped develop the AHA's media campaign. He appeared in national media and spoken to groups around the country, emphasizing the importance of utilizing mass media to inject humanist ideas into the public dialogue, improve the public image of humanists, and sway public opinion away from the religious right. As an attorney, he has advocated for church-state separation and the rights of humanists and other non-theists, and he is currently involved in implementing a legal strategy to enforce the rights of humanists and other non-theists via the avenue of equal protection law. He has worked with the Secular Coalition of America in various positions to help advocate for the rights of secular Americans. He has served on the boards of the Greater Worcester Humanists and Greater Boston Humanists. I had the pleasure to meet David a few years ago at the American Humanist Association's annual conference in Boston. And if you haven't been to one of their conferences, I would recommend it. This year it's going to be right down the road in Philadelphia. I would recommend. Their conferences are a lot of fun. It was very inspirational, and you get to meet a lot of great people. So won't you please give a warm welcome to David Niose.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, everyone, for having me here today. Special thanks to Trudy, who helped with the logistics an awful lot, and I appreciate that. She's going to get me to the airport on time. I'm going to hold her to that. But I actually came down from the north. I did not come up from D.C., where the AHA is located. I came down from the north, so I'm happy to report that I had no trouble getting over the George Washington Bridge whatsoever. That might have something to do with the fact that I flew into Newark, because even before Christie Gate, I think getting over that bridge was always kind of a challenge. A couple things about my roles. I actually am no longer on the AHA Board of Directors because I just, as of January 1st, took over the role of legal director for the AHA, and that required me to leave the position of president of the Secular Coalition. So as I stand here today, it's kind of funny. I stand here as immediate past president of both the American Humanist Association and the Secular Coalition for America, and I don't think that's something that would happen very often. When I was AHA president, people used to come up to me. In the AHA, the role of immediate past president is actually an official position with the group. You're immediate past president. And people used to come up to me and say, I can't wait until you're immediate past president. And, I know I shouldn't brag like that, but it's just one of those things where it's a position where everyone has an opinion, and the AHA is doing a lot of things, and everyone kind of wants to point the AHA and the humanist movement in their own direction. And it really is a dynamic movement. This secular movement, if you've been involved in it for any more than a few years, I'm sure you've seen the changes that have happened and the momentum that the secular movement, or if you will, the humanist movement, has taken on. And I'd like to talk about as many of those as I can today. So the topic of this talk is equal rights for atheist humanists. And that topic in itself is kind of charged, I think, because when we talk about equal rights, that implies that there's a mistreatment of a minority, right? Equal rights, there's some minority group that's being mistreated. So equal rights for atheist humanists, you're talking about atheist humanists being mistreated, and that gives rise to the question, well, do we really deserve to call our movement a movement for equal rights? Because I think it's important to differentiate between various movements for equality. What are we claiming here, and what are we not claiming? And I want to be clear about that. For one thing, I don't think we're claiming, and I don't think anyone would claim, that what's happened to atheists and humanists can be compared in any way to the experience of, say, racial minorities or women, ethnic minorities, even the LGBT movement. I think the experience of atheist humanists, we deal with a lot of prejudice, we deal with a lot of inequality, but it doesn't rise to the level of what those groups experience. And I think we should acknowledge that at the outset. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't have some legitimate gripes when it comes to the issue of equality. I think people, look back at the age of Jim Crow and slavery, and they say, well, we don't compare to that. Our experience doesn't compare to that, so, we can't be claiming equal protection, equal rights. But I would disagree with that. In fact, the prejudice against atheists and humanists is a religious discrimination, and I think we all realize how charged the issue of religion is and how important religious non-discrimination is. So right from the start, we're dealing with an important issue of religious discrimination. We need to acknowledge that. But what we are claiming is that what's happened with the religious right, the rise of the religious right, is very dangerous to this country. And discrimination against atheists and humanists has a lot to do with the rise of the religious right, and vice versa. The religious right has had a devastating effect on American society and American public policy. I think we'd all agree with that, right? And the marginalization of atheists and humanists is part of that. In fact, I would argue that the rise of the religious right would not be possible without the marginalization of atheists and humanists in American society. And just look at the devastation in all areas. I think we tend to think of the religious right as being connected to the issue of church-state separation. And yeah, the rise of the religious right has somehow messed up the issue of church-state separation in this country, but it goes much broader than that, much, much broader. Look at the issue of politics, and I describe American politics nowadays as kind of wingnut politics, right? I mean, we've got characters like Rick Perry launching his presidential campaign by filling a football stadium for a prayer rally to Jesus. Imagine how that would have been welcomed even 20 or 30 years ago in this country. He would have been laughed out of town, right? But in today's America, thanks to the rise of the religious right, that's actually seen as a legitimate campaign strategy. He came out of that prayer rally leading in the polls as a candidate for the GOP nomination. And of course, we've got people like Michelle Bachmann and Sarah Palin, who was actually on the ticket of a major party, presidential ticket in this country. I mean, she wasn't that far from reaching the highest office in the country. So somebody of that caliber. This is dangerous, and this is what comes to the political arena thanks to the rise of the religious right. Move on to another area, education. We see what the effect of the religious right on the area of education is, right? We've got creationism in public schools. We've got abstinence-only sex education. We've got history books being rewritten to present this really quasi-religious conservative presentation of American history. Move on to the area of the environment. What have we got there? Almost all of the opposition to rational environmental policy has some connection with the religious right in this country. A lot of it is driven by corporate interests that don't want environmental regulation, but they wouldn't get very far without the populist grassroots support of the religious right that sees biblical dominionism as rational public policy in their eyes. They think that God gave us, according to the Bible, control over the world to exploit, and we don't need to worry about sustainability. God will take care of everything. So there's the religious right's impact on environmental policy. On social policy, we all know what's going on there, right? It's not even about abortion anymore. They want to seriously talk about birth control as an issue that should be debated in the second decade of the 21st century. Here we are with somebody like Rick Santorum, who has a serious chance of becoming president someday, talking about birth control being an evil. This is the direction that American policy has gone. And worse than all of this, I think, is just the general climate of anti-intellectualism that seems to come along with the religious right. There's this dumbing down of the dialogue and of the policy in America so that there's really not room for reason, rational thinking, and critical thinking. Instead, it's more impulsive, fear-driven, emotionally charged dialogue. And I think the best example in recent history of this, there are many, but is the charge to war that this country took in 2003 in Iraq. That is something that you can directly point to as something that arises from America's unwillingness to even look at facts. I think when we went to war in Iraq in 2003, polls showed that close to 70% of Americans actually thought that Saddam Hussein was directly responsible for the 9/11 attacks. I mean, that is just anti-intellectualism in effect. It's just something that this country is dealing with as a result of 3 decades of the rise of the religious right. It's a long strand in American history. There is a strand of anti-intellectualism that goes back away. But since around 1979, 1980, when Jerry Falwell came with his moral majority and helped elect Ronald Reagan, we've seen a steady rise of the religious right. And I think you have to look at it objectively. We don't like to say this as humanists, but the religious right as a social and political phenomenon has been very successful. They have had a larger impact than anyone would have imagined 30 years ago on American policy and on the direction of this country. And that being said, we have to ask, well, where was the opposition? Why did the opposition to the religious right fail? That's a serious question we have to ask ourselves. Why did the opposition to the religious right fail? Well, let's take a look at the opposition to the religious right. Where did it come from? Who was it? If you really study it, it breaks down into 2 sectors. There's liberal and moderate politicians such as Ted Kennedy and Bill Clinton, the other side of the aisle from the religious right. And then there are advocacy groups that oppose the religious right, advocacy groups such as People for the American Way, the ACLU, Americans United for Separation of Church and State. Now, one thing you find if you take a look at these advocacy groups and these politicians is that they tried very hard to associate themselves with religion. Okay? A good example is Ted Kennedy. In the early 1980s, shortly after the rise of the moral majority, he went down to Lynchburg, Virginia, to Liberty College. It was Liberty Baptist College back in those days. Now it's Liberty University. But he gave a speech about religion and politics at Jerry Falwell's college. And what did he say when he got there? Well, he gets up and he says, I'm an American and I'm a Catholic. I love my country and I treasure my faith. This is the message from the opponent of the religious right. What's he doing, right? He's embracing religion himself. He's saying, well, we liberals can be religious too, right? And that's the steady message that you see if you really look at the high-profile opponents of the religious right. Of course, nobody played the religion card better than Bill Clinton, right? He was, very good at wearing religion on his sleeve and singing in church along with everyone else. And this is what happens. Same thing with the advocacy groups. If you look at People for the American Way, the ACLU, they tried and they still try very hard to get religious clerics on their boards and in their leadership positions. Of course, Barry Lynn, the Reverend Barry Lynn, has been in charge of Americans United for a long time. And that's great, but what does it do? It really sends this message that, America is very religious and we've got religion on our side too. What happens as a result of that, right? The secular demographic, the humanist demographic gets pushed off center stage more and more. America is defined as a very religious country, and all dialogue has to take place within this parameters that America is religious. We start from the premise that we're a very religious country. Well, one thing we need to realize is that this strategy certainly failed. There's no way that you can look at what's happened to America in the last generation or so and say that this strategy of the opponents of the religious right embracing religion as well as the exclusive strategy has worked. What it's done is it's driven America in the direction, it's defined America in a more conservative and a more religious way than America in reality is. It's certainly pushed our demographic right off the stage. And if you follow the secular movement for the last 10 years or so, you realize that what's happened in the last decade with the rise of the secular movement and with the emergence of secularity as something that's more visible in American society is that there's been a realization that that happened, and that what has to happen is that this secular demographic has to emerge and demand a place at the table and redefine America as not an exclusively religious country, that there's an entire segment of the population that just doesn't accept that. And that's really what's happened, and that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about atheist humanist equality, okay? What's happened if you've got your ear to the ground at all, if you read the secular publications or if you stay in touch with the movement online, what's really happened is that there's been this realization that Americans need to know that they live and work and have secular people in their community, in their families, very analogous to what happened with the gay rights movement, okay? The idea of coming out of the closet, okay? For many years, many people who were non-believers just thought that they should kind of keep their non-belief in the closet, keep it at home, don't wear it on their sleeve, don't be too public about it. Now, instead, there's a sense, and I'm sure you've seen this in your own group and just circulating within the movement if you do at all, that we need to come out, so to speak, that there has to be visible secular people everywhere, in politics, in entertainment, and everywhere else. What I call it is a demographic emergence. That I think seculars, whether you want to call yourself atheist, agnostic, humanist, there's about a dozen defining modifiers for our group. Everyone wants to debate about which one's the best one, like someday they're going to win the debate and everyone's going to agree on atheist or humanist. My take is that we should just agree that all of these labels are fine. Whatever, free thinker, post-theological I think is a good one. But any one of these labels that you feel that are good for yourself, or maybe more than one, if you want to accept it and be part of it, that's great. Just be out there. It's a consciousness-raising mission in a lot of ways. It really is just a means of letting people know that we're here. There's a saying in the feminist movement that feminism is the radical idea that women are people too, right? I think our movement it can be said that the secular movement is the radical idea that non-believers are Americans too, right? And that's really what we're trying to drive home. So it is equality. It's equal protection, equal rights. And, when you have these movements for equality, whether it's racial, gender, or anything else, there's always an element of pride, right? When you're in the closet or when you are a second-class citizen, it's understood that society kind of looks at you that way and that you should kind of, don't be open as an atheist. That's not something to be proud of. But, if you think about it, our movement has plenty of reason for pride, right? Over 90% 50% of the scientists on the National Academy of Sciences have atheist or agnostic religious beliefs. That's nothing to be ashamed of, is it? In many studies I've done, as I point out in Non-Believer Nation, there have been many studies done over the years that compare secularity as opposed to religiosity. And when you look at social ills, they stack up much greater on the side of religious societies. And that applies internationally when you compare the more religious United States to more secular societies such as Western Europe, and it applies within the United States when you compare more religious regions of the United States to less religious regions. When you do that, no matter what, the statistics show that murder rates, other violent crime rates, STD rates, teen pregnancy rates, and a whole host of social ills, they all stack up much higher on the religious society than they do on the secular society. Now, isn't that an interesting dynamic? Now, there's always somebody who says, well, correlation doesn't equal cause, right? Well, just because that's the case, there might be other factors causing that. Religion is not the cause of the greater social problems in religious societies. What I say is, I'll buy that. I'll give you that. But remember, we're talking about equality here. Certainly when the numbers stack up that great in favor of secularity and against religiosity, maybe you can say that religion is not causing the greater social problems in religious societies, but certainly nobody can seriously argue that secularity causes social problems, right? We're talking about equality here. It may be in the privacy of our own little groups we can talk about superiority, that our worldview is better than theirs, but certainly in a political context and in a social context, we're just arguing that we deserve equality, that we should not be discriminated against, that there shouldn't be a stigma attached to our demographic, that we are Americans too, and we're proud Americans, and we have every reason to be proud as a group. So these are things to think about. And in the context of that now, okay, we deserve equality, we're not getting equality, what are we going to do about it? I'd like to talk about this Massachusetts lawsuit that we have going, because it really illustrates, I think, the application of this equality-minded, identity-oriented approach to activism. Back in the day when humanist groups really suppressed the idea of promoting God, disbelief in God, and really didn't wear their disbelief on their sleeve at all, the movement was not identity-oriented. In fact, humanists like John Dewey and a lot of the old-timers really tried to blend into the religious tapestry of America as much as possible, even using God language, even though they didn't believe in God and religious language. The more modern secular movement that's really come out of the woodwork in the last decade is identity-oriented. It's very much promoting the idea of wearing a secular identity on your sleeve, and that's a good thing. So this lawsuit in Massachusetts is what I would call an implementation of this more general strategy of being identity-oriented and equality-oriented. So let me describe the lawsuit this way. When most minority groups, and that would be racial minorities, women or ethnic minorities, or even the LGBT community, when they assert their rights in court, if you think about it, the avenue that they usually use is the avenue of equal protection, okay, equality. A good example would be the classic case that everyone knows of, Brown versus Board of Education, right? Brown versus Board of Education desegregated public schools, at least in theory. The idea was that separate but equal facilities were not adequate, that separate is inherently unequal. You have a minority group coming in claiming that they're being discriminated against, they prove their case, and the government is, the courts order the government to desegregate. So that's equal protection in work. Now, atheists, however, if you think about it, and humanists, have not used the avenue of equal protection when they have pursued their legal rights. Instead, what have we done? We argue church-state separation, right, under the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. The Establishment Clause is there. It's been there since the beginning in this country. Jefferson talked about this wall of separation in the First Amendment. So we go in, we see something that's not right to us. We haven't argued equal protection. We can say Establishment Clause, church-state separation, and it's great when it works, and it has worked in the past, certainly. The heyday of the Establishment Clause, I would say, would be the 1960s, when you had cases like Engel, which got school-sponsored prayer removed from public schools, and the Abington School District versus Schempp case, which got school-sponsored Bible reading removed from public schools, and there are other cases as well. So the Establishment Clause certainly has its purpose, and it's not something we want to forget about. But we should realize, especially in this day and age, that there are problems, or at least challenges, with utilization of the Establishment Clause. For one thing, we've got conservative courts now, right? We've got, if you've followed Establishment Clause jurisprudence in the last decade or so, you realize that these years of Republican presidents have resulted in a lot of very conservative judges in federal courts who are not very sympathetic to Establishment Clause arguments. In fact, there are many cases where they have found that the plaintiffs don't even have standing to sue, okay? You don't like something the government's doing, and the court kicks you out saying, you don't even have standing to sue in this case. So the government embrace of religion stays in place. So that's one problem. Another problem that you see with the Establishment Clause, though, is this whole intent of the founders argument that you always see. When you bring up an Establishment Clause issue, people always want to say, well, what would Washington or Jefferson or Adams think of this? You know, as if we could somehow transpose the mind of these 18th century rich white men and impose them on 21st century America to judge, you know, a nativity scene on a public park, or the promotion of religion in public schools. This is really, it's a ridiculous exercise if you think about it at any level at all. And the interesting thing is, though, if you did it, they'd probably be pretty sympathetic to the secular view, quite frankly, but that's another story. What you should really take away from it, though, is that realize that, you know, you never get these intent of the founder arguments when a racial discrimination claim is made, right? You know, an African American comes into court claiming racial discrimination. The judge never says, gee, I wonder what Jefferson would think of this, you know, or I wonder what Washington, you know, the slave-owning founders would think. Or when a woman comes in, you know, claiming sex discrimination, you know, gee, you know, what would Adams and Madison and Jefferson think of equality for women? I mean, they'd probably roll on the floor laughing, quite frankly. I mean, that's just the mindset of 18th century men. It's not really, I guess it's mildly critical of them, but it's just the reality of the times, too. But you never get this, gee, what would the framers think? Or you know, gay rights. I mean, you know, did they even acknowledge that homosexuality even existed? You know, gee, what would Washington think of gay rights? You know, I don't know. But yet with secular, when atheists come forward, the question looms, what would the founders think of this? So, you know, why is that? Well, the reason is because equal protection is a more modern notion. Okay, the equal protection language never came into the Constitution until the 14th Amendment after the Civil War, and then it was never really used for equality for minority groups until almost 100 years after that. Okay, so something to chew on. And another thing that's very important to realize is that the Establishment Clause is not an identity-oriented remedy, okay? And if you want proof of that, just look and consider the fact that even a Christian can bring an Establishment Clause case to remove a cross from a public park, okay? A Christian can drive by and say, what's that? Get that cross down, okay? I believe in church-state separation. Get that down. Identity is not a critical component to Establishment Clause jurisprudence. We've got cases like that. The Salazar versus Buono case, which took down the Mojave Desert Cross, or tried to, was a case of a Catholic man who objected to a cross on a public park. And he said, I want the cross in my church and in my home, but I don't want it on a public park, okay? So identity is not a critical element to an Establishment Clause claim. So the obvious question, I think, is, you know, why not equal protection for atheists and humanists. Why shouldn't we go into court and claim, we are a valid minority group who should not be discriminated against, and we demand equality. We demand that this government treat us like a legitimate part of society, which we are. And that's exactly what we're doing at the American Humanist Association. We developed this legal strategy and have implemented this legal strategy to really drive home that singular point that atheist humanists deserve equality. And we implemented it in Massachusetts in a state case there. We filed a case, and this is important, we filed it in state court, challenging a state law that requires schools to conduct a daily Pledge of Allegiance exercise led by teachers on grounds that it violates the state constitution. The Massachusetts state constitution has an equal rights amendment, a non-discrimination amendment that expressly forbids discrimination based on a whole bunch of criteria, race, sex, and other things, one of them being religion. So we've got constitutional prohibition of discrimination based on religion in Massachusetts. So why not bring this state case? You notice there's no federal component to it whatsoever. A state case in challenging a state law under the state constitution. And the argument is very simple, really. If discrimination based on religion is unlawful, and it is according to the Massachusetts Constitution, then a daily school-sponsored exercise that defines the nation as being under God for the purpose of instilling patriotism in young children certainly discriminates against atheists and humanists, right? I think it's a pretty straightforward argument. So it portrays believers as true patriots, and it portrays true patriots as believers. Therefore, it really portrays atheist humanists as second-class citizens at best. So if equality means anything, I think equality means that no child should go to school every day to have his or her religious class defined as second-class citizens. So the suit challenges what I call theistic supremacy, okay? In this nation, there has been a notion developed that theism is supreme, that we are a theistic nation, we are one nation under God. You could also call it theistic privilege, if you will, if you like the lingo of equality. There's a lot of talk about male privilege and white privilege, and I think that's true. Well, there is also this theistic privilege that kind of permeates American society. And if we want to talk the language of equality, I guess we should use it. I'd point out that this case, and it's called Doe versus Acton, it was argued to the state Supreme Judicial Court in September, and we're still waiting for the ruling to come down. But it's analogous somewhat to the case that also came down in Massachusetts about a decade ago of Goodridge versus Department of Public Health. I'm sure some of you are familiar with that. Goodridge was the case that legalized same-sex marriage in Massachusetts 10 years ago. It was a state case challenging a state law in Massachusetts under the Massachusetts state constitution. Sound familiar? And when the court came down and ruled in favor of the plaintiffs, everyone said, well, gee, it only applies in Massachusetts. But I think we saw what happened as a result of that Massachusetts verdict, the Massachusetts finding, that it opened up a conversation about same-sex marriage and about gay rights. With Goodridge, it's kind of interesting if you really look at it. Before the Goodridge case came down, the liberal position in politics is that gays and lesbians should be able to get civil unions, and the conservative position was no, we don't want civil unions for gays. After the Goodridge decision came down, saying no, that they should, marriage is what we want. Well, the liberal position became marriage. The conservative position became, aren't civil unions good enough? So I think what we'd like to see in Massachusetts, if everything falls together perfectly with the ruling the right way in this case, is a conversation started in America about whether it's really, isn't it kind of wrong to do this every morning and to define the country? There'll be a conversation about the Pledge of Allegiance, whether it's really right to define the country as being under God, and this whole notion of theistic supremacy and theistic privilege. And the other thing that I wanted to throw out to you is that as a result of doing this case, we've also kind of looked around the country to look where else. Well, where next, right? Where do we want to implement this strategy next? And we want to go to the states that have the strongest equality jurisprudence, strong constitutional principles that support the idea of equality. And I will tell you that after Massachusetts, one of the states that is right near the top is the state of New Jersey. So at the Legal Center, we are very interested in talking to families, if you know of any, from New Jersey who might be interested in pursuing this case. I know there are many families in New Jersey of atheists, humanists, belief systems who probably are kind of irked by the Pledge of Allegiance and the way that it kind of alienates them and their families. So if anyone is interested in talking to me about that, either today or down the road, I'd be glad to do that. I can give you the details of what it involved in Massachusetts. And in Massachusetts, you notice the name of the case is Doe because the family wanted to stay anonymous for obvious reasons. I don't think you want to be standing up publicly in your community saying, yeah, we're the ones challenging the Pledge of Allegiance and send your little kid off to school. So we did it anonymously, and it wasn't a problem doing that. So anyway, it's kind of an interesting twist on things, if you will. This whole idea of atheist humanist equality and how we're implementing it with this lawsuit and through other means as well. I think if you look at a lot of the advertising that's been happening since about 2005 when the AHA started advertising, and then other groups started advertising with billboards and transit ads and all sorts of other means. This is identity-oriented activism by being out there and putting yourself and your identity, your group in the public eye. And we've had a lot of success with it. I think it's part of the reason why we're seeing the numbers shift in this country. It wasn't very long ago, everything was down in single digits as far as people not believing in God, people identifying as atheist or agnostic or humanist or non-religious. Now the numbers are all creeping up around 20% and higher. And this is a movement, I would argue, is one of the most important social movements of the 21st century, really. This country has been socked on the side of the head by religious conservatism and really driven in the direction of harsh conservatism and away from what I would call human-oriented public policy. And it all traces back to the religious right and the marginalization of our demographics. So by emerging and asserting ourselves, I really think we can put our country on a track toward rational public policy, hopefully. And that's what we're shooting for. So that's all I had to say. I'll be glad to chat about all of this with you if you have questions.
In making the distinction between the equal protection argument and the establishment argument, I think one reason why the equal protection argument appeals to me, the Establishment Clause appeals to me as an argument is because it is a little bit more universal or universalist in the claim, trying to say that religion should be kept out of government because it is, harmful to the exercise of politics and the formulation of good public policy. If you use the equal protection argument and make it an identity thing, you're basically saying, well, we want to be treated as yet another unique subgroup within society without aspirations to changing the larger society, but just asking for tolerance for us. And it's okay if you then just circumscribe us as a sort of permanent subset of the society, rather than us trying to say, no, we're trying to make a larger claim about how society should work. If you're a member of another identity group, you're not asking the rest of society to become part of your group. You're not asking the rest of society to share your gender or your racial or ethnic group status. But when you're presenting a establishment clause, you're basically saying, no, I want to try and convince you that religion should stay out of government as a general principle. And I think there is a difference in the in the aspiration of the claim. It may still be a very good strategy to start with the equal protection argument, but I think we want to eventually get back to the Establishment Clause basis of the claim.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point at many levels. I guess the universality of the equal protection principle is the universal principle of equality. I think by pointing out that there's discrimination against a subset is not necessarily asking for any sort of privilege for the subset. It's a reminder to society that the universal principle of equality is being ignored. So I don't know that the distinction is as great as you're pointing it out to be, because although you're bringing the case on behalf of a minority, the greater principle that you're pointing to is a universal principle. I think that's how I would analyze that. I don't think it's, well, gee, because of atheists we can't refer to God. It's like, no, we have equality, and therefore we don't discriminate against atheists or anyone else. I don't know. At some level, I think it's kind of an academic analysis, but it's I'm not as turned off by bringing the claim on behalf of a minority. I just don't see that as stepping away from any kind of universal principle, I guess.
The United States Treasury prints money that annoys the hell out of me, where it says, "In God we trust."
Yeah.
Okay? Well, that's the motto of the United States, which was implemented in 1954, and it's printed on our money. And who the heck is the we? Can we bring which would be, to get rid of that word God, which would be the stronger argument? Because it's the word God, it's not goddess. So to be equal, it should say, "In God and goddesses we trust," because there are 2.5 million more women than men in the United States. So that's a slur against not only women, and so that's my identity, but that word God is a male God.
Yeah.
So
and
can we bring
it's a singular monotheistic
to get rid of
God.
it? Can we bring a suit under the Equal Protection Clause, because it does discriminate against women?
I think
that is a masculine word.
Well, I think it would be a stronger argument under equal protection to say that it discriminates against atheists, but one could argue that God is female, so that it's not necessarily a masculine term. But I do believe that "In God We Trust" should not pass Establishment Clause scrutiny either, but it has. That's the problem. So, and that's part of the reason why this equal protection approach is all the more viable, I think, because the Establishment Clause has been interpreted to make room for these references to theology. So I think it would be a valid equal protection case, but I would suggest the minority group bringing the case should be atheists, not women.
Thank you very much for your talk. It was very informative. You said something earlier about a correlation between secular parts of society and religious parts of society and crime, lack of less crime in secular. I would be very interested to know in how that kind of a conclusion was arrived at, and whether or not economic, parameters were taken into account.
Oh, sure. There's almost an entire chapter of Non-Believer Nation that talks about this criteria. One of the best pieces of research on it was by a guy named Phil Zuckerman, a sociologist from California, who did a paper on it and really covers the issue in great depth. If you want, I cite it in the book and I talk about it, but if you wanted to actually go to the study, the site is in the book as well. And of course there are economic, as I said, correlation doesn't necessarily mean cause. You do tend to see more religiosity where there is economic deprivation, and as people become more prosperous, it's been well documented. As societies become more prosperous, they tend to kind of shed their religion. As societies and individuals become more prosperous, you tend to see them step away from religion. Although that's not universal either. There are certainly a lot of rich funders of the religious right, as we know. So there are multiple factors, and I think it's a complicated analysis, and I would never want to stand here and just say religion causes social problems, period. I think it's much, much more complicated than that. But the point I made is that when the correlation is that great, I think it's very hard to argue that somehow secularity causes social problems. And if we're arguing equality, that's as far as we need to go. Yeah.
What is the argument in the Massachusetts case against you? Is it tradition that under God, is it tradition? I mean, it seems pretty straightforward that they have a very weak case.
Yeah, it is a very weak case, and the briefs are available online, by the way, if you want to Google them. The SJC has everything available online. But, the main thing they argue, which is really kind of hilarious, is that the under God language is not religious at all. It's just a reference to heritage and history. The interesting thing is that the groups making these arguments are not the American Historical Association or the American. They're a litany of religious right groups. We have the Knights of Columbus. Every religious right group in the country, it seems, came charging into this case. Knights of Columbus, Alliance Defense, Liberty Council, and a bunch of other religious right groups, all claiming that under God has nothing to do with religion, which is really... The judges saw that as well, and I think they got a little yuck out of it themselves, but we'll have to see what they really think when they issue their opinion.
Thank you again. Your talk is very informative. I wanted to ask you a question. From my observation, with the growth of the secular movement, I'm seeing a growth on the opposite side of an increase in the religiosity. For example, on the news this week, I heard that the people who do not believe in evolution, they did this poll, has gone up 20% in the last 10 years. Is there some dynamic that's going on with growth of recognition of the secular aspect of the country and the backlash coming from the religious right?
Well, I think the numbers actually don't show that rejection of evolution is going up. I think, if anything, the numbers are creeping up in favor of accepting. I don't like to say believing in evolution because that just sounds like it's something to be believed in. But acceptance of evolution has gone up a little bit. But the interesting thing is that in the Republican Party, acceptance has gone down. And the way I interpret this, I mean, I don't claim to be a political scientist whose opinion should matter too much on this, but I just think it's evidence of the divisiveness of the country, that the country is just becoming so divided between the camp of rationality and the camp of rejecting rationality, the Republican Party has basically gone wingnut, and I don't really give the Democratic Party a whole lot of credit either, because I think the Democratic Party is more like kind of a center-right party in any other developed country. But it's really just an evidence of that, I think, more than anything. So hopefully, though, with the secular movement kind of emerging and bringing more reason into the public discourse, hopefully openly atheist and humanist candidates running for office soon. I'm sure we're going to be seeing more of that. We're already seeing a little bit, but I'm sure we're going to see more. I think the only thing that can happen is the pendulum will start swinging in the direction of reason. Yeah.
Yes, I was going to ask about whether it's at all possible to try to get that under God out, but it sounds like we can't there's no hope for that. Is that what you're saying?
I wouldn't say that, no. We brought this case in Massachusetts because Massachusetts has such strong state constitutional equality language, but make no mistake about it, there is equality principles in the federal Constitution. There's no Equal Rights Amendment that expressly forbids discrimination based on religion in the federal Constitution, but there is dicta in federal case law that says that religion is a suspect class for discrimination purposes, and suspect class status is key to getting federal equal protection. So we have every intention of pursuing this strategy on the federal level, but I think it's best to start where the jurisprudence appears to be strongest.
Not to shift too much from the political philosophy of it, but I am concerned about one practical aspect. Obviously, you and people in similar groups have accomplished a great deal through legal action. But legal action is expensive. And if anything, it seems to be the limiting factor in the use of legal action possibly is the amount of funds available for it. So my question is, how likely are we to see adequate funding for this kind of legal action, both for the AHA and other groups in the future? Is the funding adequate? Is it coming in? Is it rising? Because if it isn't, that's going to limit our legal capabilities.
Well, it is coming in and it is rising. Is it adequate? I'd say, we certainly could use more. I'm not going to stand here and say, otherwise. We certainly, but I'd keep in mind the AHA has been around since 1941, but the legal center of the AHA has only been around since 2006. And when it first opened up, it was really, a news shop that all we had the resources to do was to do an occasional signing on to amicus briefs, and that we weren't pursuing our own litigation. We've really only been pursuing our own litigation for the last few years, and we're definitely pointed in the direction of increasing that and doing more and more of it. And obviously, more funding would be the key to that.
You mentioned that about 90% of the people who have been elected to the Academy of Sciences are either agnostic or atheist. I have been in a scientific circle, and it seems to many of us that it is very damaging to the United States, the lack of support for basic sciences. This is one thing which I think in the past there was a greater bipartisan support, and now I was wondering whether, to what extent is this lack of support of basic science is due to concern of budget deficits, or is it due to the fact that scientists are considered to be the enemy of religion?
Well, I think it's a combination of that, and I just personally, I think also that the corporate interests that really control this country to a large degree have no desire or no benefit from a scientifically literate public. A public of consumers is what's really wanted from the corporate sector. As long as they have enough scientists to do their science, that's all that really interests them. And I just don't think that a scientifically literate public is in the interest of any of the interests that really control this country.
This is a really interesting avenue, and I wish you luck, but I wonder what your recourse would be if they took the easy way out, Massachusetts court, and said, it doesn't say in the Constitution freedom from religion. It says you're allowed to practice your religion, but that doesn't include the people. It should need to say, the Constitution needs to say, you're allowed to not have any religion at all. What would you be your recourse to that?
Well, if they find against us, I don't think their opinion will take that approach. I think it would be different. But to answer your question, if if we don't come out victorious in Massachusetts, there are many other states that have strong equality language, and we're confident that the discussion will get started one way or another. Even if the decision doesn't go the right way, which I really expect that it will in some level, but if it doesn't, there'll be a conversation started, and the conversation will not be about what the founders wanted. The conversation will be about whether it's right to discriminate against secular families or not.
Is the ACLU going along with you with an amicus brief with this case?
No. The only group that filed an amicus brief on our side was CFI, Center for Inquiry.
I think that many Americans feel in their gut that the church has kind of held things together. The church in the sense of all religions, not one in particular, but all of them. Many of us in this room would like to see the humanist minority increase in size. We all know about the griefs that the church has caused, religions in general have caused. But thinking now of the division, the divisiveness of politics, are you at all worried that we could step into a trap of just augmenting that divisiveness permanently and being attached to the divide rather than the constructive side of humanism being better for the country as a whole?
I think that's a common question that comes up, and my answer is that I think as long as we're talking about equality and about how it's just not right to marginalize a group, the conversation is going to go in the right way. I would remind you that the idea of not being confrontational at all and just kind of working with religious groups and religious individuals for progressive ideals or whatever is basically the strategy that was tried for the latter half of the 20th century. Starting even earlier than that, starting with Dewey and moving forward, the idea of humanists was to not make waves and to just kind of go with the flow and not promote, not demand equality, really, to accept second-class citizenship, to accept this nation as defined as being under God and all that. And I think it's necessary to push the envelope a little bit and to promote identity and equality. And if it's done right, I just don't see how anyone can stand up and say, no, the atheist kid should just have to sit there and watch every day. From K through 12, it's thousands of times every atheist kid has to, watch this ceremony, if you will, that promotes theism. And it's I think anyone who thinks about it at any more than a superficial level realizes the inherent inequality of it and unfairness.
Are you anti-pledge or anti the phrase under God?
Well, I think there's room for discussion about whether we should have a loyalty oath every day in public school, put it that way. I think that's but if there's going to be a loyalty oath, damn it, it should be secular.
My question has to do with the many people in this country who purport to be religious, or I hate to put it this way, the guys who go with their wives to church, or the couples that start going to church because they have kids and they really want an ethical situation for them. And I wanted to know what you thought about that group, because it would suggest there's many more people who don't believe in what they're saying they believe, and whether or not if you succeed, they can come out from under that cover.
Thank you for pointing that out, because that actually helps answer your question as well. I think when we talk about equality and how this group deserves to be treated equally and how those who don't believe should identify as such, you notice throughout all of that, we're not trying to convert anyone. I mean, I know we'd like to see more people who believe stop believing and come onto our side, of course, but that's not really what the movement is all about. The movement is about encouraging those who don't believe to be honest about their worldview and to just come out and to be part of it. How are you going to do that? Well, by normalizing being secular and by normalizing not believing. So I think what you point out is absolutely right. What you're basically saying is there are millions of Americans who aren't part of our group, at least openly, because they are hesitant to do so. But by promoting not the idea that God belief is dumb and that if you're religious you're stupid, but instead promoting the idea of secularism is a secular worldview is perfectly respectable, and there are lots of us out there, and we're running for office, and we're in your schools, atheist clubs in schools. What a great concept that is! I mean, all this normalization of secularity is what's going to get us at the table, I think.
Up in South Boston, which you're probably familiar with, which was a strongly Catholic town.
Understatement.
And crime was a way of life in Southie.
No coincidence.
And I was glad to get out of there in one piece. But I grew up during the war, the Second World War. I'm old enough, and we had the Pledge of Allegiance, but there was no under God. That didn't come until 1954. So I was 20 by then. They kind of resented it, as a matter of fact. So I was so loyal. I had lots of cousins in the war, and as little kids we collected metal and things, what have you. So it was kind of an insult, to say that you had to say under God. When we had been, such loyal kids up to that point. And now in our local town, I'm on several committees in the town. And every time we have a meeting, we have to go through the Pledge of Allegiance. And for a while, I would inject, I would not say under God. I just kind of, gotten to that point, and people kind of look at me. So it's quite annoying.
There's a lot of people who just either just are silent at that point or say under reason or under Constitution. I think the important thing is, though, that when you're participating in the ceremony, nobody really notices, or very few people really notice that you're doing that. So you're really, by standing up and participating in the exercise at all, you are validating the under God language at some level. And I'm not criticizing anyone who does, because I know it's very hard to sit out and have everyone. I mean, people who were attacked at Yankee Stadium, right, for not standing up during God Bless America. So I know what it's like, and I don't criticize anyone who just goes with the flow. That's understandable. But I think we should realize that by being kind of cutely rebellious, by saying under reason or something like that, you're really not standing up to the system, because you're one of the people standing there apparently validating the pledge as written.
It was changed.
Right.
It wasn't written.
Of course, right, as written in 1954, yeah.
I like the what you said about coming out, because a lot of times when we hear about humanists, it's about what they're against rather than what they're for. And sometimes that's why they go towards religion. But humanists and their principles have a lot to offer, and I don't know that it's actually, like you say, one by one, people come out and open up a... Thinking about that, I was at Starbucks, and we got into a discussion, and I don't know how it came up, but I said, I'm going to a humanist meeting, and they said, oh, what's that? And I kind of talked about it, and this one guy I know goes to church, but he kind of said to me, oh, I just go to church. He said, that's great. I thought he'd have another response, but he actually liked what I said. It was funny.
Yeah. Well, it's like this woman said, there are a lot of people in church pews who probably, if they were honest about their worldview, would be sitting here and not listening to some preacher.
I don't know if there's a loyalty oath now for teachers, but years ago, a teacher was given the right not to say the Pledge of Allegiance as long as she enabled the students to say it. Is that part of your argument, that that's not good enough?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
there's clear case law from the Supreme Court dating back to the 1940s, the Barnett case, which declares that even students do not have to say the pledge. Every student has the right to sit out and not participate in the pledge exercise. But as I said, that does not change the fact that the school is conducting an exercise every day that is defining patriotism in a way that marginalizes non-believers, that really stigmatizes atheism, humanism as being somehow unpatriotic. So the fact that it's voluntary is completely irrelevant. It's if the pledge said that we were one nation under Jesus, would it be fine? Would we say to Jews and Hindus and Muslims, well, you don't have to participate. Just watch every day while the school conducts this exercise. That's not equality. That's still inequality.
Yes, I'm a teacher.
Yeah.
And every morning during homeroom, we have the Pledge of Allegiance. And I've told my students that I'm an atheist, and so I shut my mouth for under God. But now you're making me think that if I really have to reject the whole statement, the whole pledge.
I don't know.
I mean, I don't want to lose my job. But
Right. Right. I wouldn't stand here and tell you what to do at all. I think, everyone's got their own situation, and certainly don't put your job in jeopardy over it. But I would say as a constitutional matter that there should be no requirement that you participate in the exercise at all. It should not cost you your job. Now, in the real world, would it? I don't know that at all. But I think everyone has to make their own decision as far as how far they're going to go in conforming with standards that they're not completely comfortable with. We all compromise all the time, so it's not. I don't think we can criticize people who do.
I always keep my mouth shut during Under God, and it's been a way to find other atheists, so it's actually been kind of cool.
Do you complete the pledge a few bars sooner than everyone else?
Also, I'm a former teacher, and I told my students that I don't believe in not only the under God, it makes it a prayer, but that the liberty and justice for all is also a hoot. So I stayed at my computer. Those who wanted to stand up could stand, and those who didn't. But also, the principal led us in the pledge. He would say, we will all
over
say
the
pledge
loudspeaker?
Over the loudspeaker. We will all say the pledge together, which, according to what you're saying, seems to be a violation, seems to be against the law.
Well, no, currently it's not. The principal has every right to lead the school in the pledge, but what we're saying is that it should not be the law. There shouldn't be statutes on the books. If we have religious equality, there should not be statutes on the books requiring daily pledge recitation, school-sponsored pledge recitation at all. And I would say that the federal pledge statute itself is potentially a target of an equal protection case because it's only really been targeted under the Establishment Clause. You might remember the Newdow cases from about 10 years ago, and those cases were ultimately unsuccessful. But I think the federal pledge statute is vulnerable to a good equal protection argument. But the area of federal religious equal protection is totally undeveloped. There are almost no cases on it. There are a few, but it's complicated, but they really don't address equal protection in the context that we'd be addressing it. And it's a barren landscape, which is kind of exciting from a legal perspective because there's a lot of law to be made there. It's just that we want to move carefully and make it the right way too. We want the first precedents at the federal level to be good precedents.
Last question. So what's going to happen if you win the case? Is Massachusetts going to have to rewrite, and can they rewrite the pledge to leave out the words under God? Or would they have to say, okay, we're not going to say it at all. Can they legally do either one of those
Either
things?
one of those options are possible, and other options are possible as well. Right now, the statute requires this daily patriotic exercise. Well, the SJC could say, well, go ahead and have your patriotic exercise, but make it something else. Make it something that doesn't discriminate based on religion. Read about a different historical hero every morning for a minute or two, or whatever. There's innumerable possibilities, but the starting point is a declaration that the current practice is unconstitutional. Where they go from there, there's a lot of different possibilities. Where we go from Massachusetts is there's a few possibilities as well, but I'd like to say New Jersey will be one of the first stops. So.
All right, let's give a big round of applause for David.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot.
That was really great. All right, that was really wonderful. I really enjoyed that. I think everyone else did too.
Thank you for listening to the Red Bank Humanists podcast. For more information, visit redbankhumanists.org or follow us on Twitter @RedBankHumanists.